"I don't care if you're his mother, get out," my daughter-in-law said, as security dragged me from my son's funeral. Everyone I knew looked away. Minutes later, I made one call that destroyed her. Now she begs for mercy, but it's too late. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button. Let me tell you how I got to this moment. Standing in the rain outside Riverside Memorial Chapel, mascara running down my cheeks like black tears while my son's widow had me physically removed from his funeral. 3 months ago, I was Margaret Carter, proud mother of a billionaire tech genius. Today, I'm apparently the villain in Jessica's twisted little performance. It started when David came home that Tuesday in March, eyes bright with excitement about some woman he'd met at a charity auction. "Her name's Jessica, Mom. She's incredible, smart, funny, gorgeous." I should have been happy. My 32-year-old son had been alone too long since his divorce from Amanda 2 years earlier. But something in his voice set off every maternal alarm I possessed. "What does she do?" I asked, setting down my coffee. We were sitting in my kitchen, the same one where I'd bandaged his scraped knees and helped with calculus homework. "She works with nonprofits, helps with fundraising." His answer was vague, rehearsed. David had created Connect Mind, an app that revolutionized social networking, sold it for $2.8 billion, and suddenly every woman in Seattle wanted to help him spend his money. "Which nonprofits?" I pressed. As a retired nurse who'd spent 40 years reading people, I'd developed a healthy skepticism about anyone who described their job in such general terms. David's smile faltered slightly. "Different ones. She's between projects right now." Between projects? Right. Like I was born yesterday. But David was in love, or at least in lust, and nothing I said would have mattered. Within 6 months, they were engaged. Within a year, married. And within 13 months, David was dead from what the police called an unfortunate accident involving cleaning supplies and poor ventilation in his basement workshop. Standing outside that funeral home, rain soaking through my black dress, I knew 3 things with absolute certainty. David hadn't died accidentally. Jessica had killed him, and she'd somehow convinced everyone that I was an unstable, grieving mother, making wild accusations. The worst part? Even Ryan Mitchell, David's best friend since college, had taken her side. "Mrs. Carter," he'd said gently at the graveside, "I know this is hard, but you need to accept what happened. David's gone, and blaming Jessica won't bring him back." Ryan, who'd been like a second son to me. Ryan, who used to raid my refrigerator and sleep on our couch through college. Ryan, who'd stood up as David's best man and promised to watch out for his happiness. Now he was defending the woman who'd killed him. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and dialed a number I'd hoped never to use. "Detective Rodriguez? This is Margaret Carter. I need to report a murder." 2 years earlier, David had bounced into my house like a teenager with his first crush. "Mom, you have to meet her. I'm bringing Jessica to Sunday dinner next week." I was arranging flowers. David's late father had always brought me roses on Sundays, and I kept the tradition alive by buying them myself. "That's wonderful. Sweetheart, tell me about her." "She's 29, originally from Portland. Lost her parents in a car accident when she was 25. No siblings. She's been on her own ever since, which is why she's so independent and strong." The orphan story. Classic. I'd seen this movie before, and it never ended well for the rich guy. "What's her last name?" "Whitmore. Jessica Whitmore." David was practically glowing. "She doesn't know about the money yet. We've been dating for 2 months, and I haven't told her about Connect Mind." This was interesting. "How did you meet again?" "Children's Hospital charity auction. She was helping organize it." David sat down, accepting the coffee I offered. "She's passionate about helping kids, Mom. When she talks about her work, her whole face lights up." I made appropriate impressed noises while mental alarm bells clanged. Beautiful young woman at charity auction meets recently divorced billionaire and doesn't know he's rich. Either she was the most oblivious person on the planet, or she knew exactly who David was and was playing a very sophisticated game. Sunday dinner was educational. Jessica Whitmore was absolutely beautiful. Long blonde hair, perfect figure, stunning blue eyes that seemed to take in every detail of David's house. She was also charming asking thoughtful questions about my nursing career and complimenting my pot roast with just the right amount of enthusiasm. Too much enthusiasm, actually. Who gets that excited about pot roast? Mrs. Carter, she said, helping clear dishes despite my protests. David talks about you constantly. You clearly did an amazing job raising such a wonderful man. Please call me Margaret. I watched her stack plates with practiced efficiency. David mentioned you work with children's charities? Whenever I can. Having lost my parents so young, I understand how important support systems are for vulnerable kids. Her eyes glistened with perfectly timed tears. After dinner, I followed them onto the back porch where David was showing off his workshop. This is where I developed Connect Mind, he said proudly. Spent 3 years down here coding and designing before the app launched. I watched Jessica's face carefully. Her expression showed polite interest, but I caught a flicker of something else. Recognition? Calculation? It was gone so quickly I might have imagined it. What's Connect Mind? She asked. The question sounded natural, but something about her tone felt rehearsed. David launched into the explanation he'd given 100 interviews, how he'd created an app that made social networking more intuitive and personal, how it had grown from a college project to a platform with 200 million users. That's incredible, Jessica breathed. You must be so proud. And successful. There, that little pause before successful, she was fishing. It's done well, David said modestly. He still hadn't told her about the $2.8 billion sale. After they left, I sat in my kitchen making mental notes. Beautiful? Check. Charming? Check. Conveniently orphaned with a tragic backstory? Check. Working in nonprofits where financial records were murky and oversight was minimal? Check. And then there was the biggest red flag of all. She was trying too hard. Real people, especially people dealing with genuine grief over lost parents, don't perform their emotions quite so perfectly. I called my friend Helen, who'd worked as a private investigator before retiring. I need a background check, I said, quietly. Maternal instincts acting up? Helen knew me well. Something like that. Her name is Jessica Whitmore, originally from Portland. Claims her parents died in a car accident about 4 years ago. 2 weeks later, Helen called back. Margaret, we need to talk. In person. We met at Starbucks, and Helen slid a folder across the table. There's no record of any Jessica Whitmore from Portland whose parents died in a car accident 4 years ago. In fact, there are only 3 Jessica Whitmores in Oregon, and they're all alive with living parents. My blood ran cold. So who is she? That's what we need to figure out. But Margaret, Helen's voice was serious, if she's lying about her identity, she's lying about everything else too. I drove home with my hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to figure out how to tell David that the love of his life was a complete fraud. But when I pulled into my driveway, Ryan Mitchell was waiting for me, leaning against his car with a concerned expression. Mrs. Carter, we need to talk about David and Jessica. I'm worried about him, Ryan said, following me into the house. David's completely infatuated, but something feels off about her. Finally, someone else who saw it. What do you mean? Ryan accepted the coffee I offered and sat across from me at the kitchen table. Last week, David mentioned he was thinking about updating his will. He wants to make Jessica his primary beneficiary. I nearly dropped my mug. They've been dating for 2 months. Exactly. And yesterday she asked me about David's finances. Said she wanted to contribute equally to dates and trips, but needed to know his budget so she could plan accordingly. That's, I searched for words, actually reasonable if you think about it. Except she specifically asked about his liquid assets and investment portfolio. Who talks like that unless they're already thinking about money? Ryan pulled out his phone. There's something else. I did some digging after our conversation about her working with charities. I couldn't find any record of Jessica Whitmore working with any nonprofit in the Seattle area. No employment history, no volunteer records, nothing. This confirmed Helen's findings, but I kept that to myself. What are you thinking? I'm thinking David's about to make the biggest mistake of his life, but he won't listen to me. Every time I try to bring up concerns, he gets defensive and says I'm being overprotective. Over the next few weeks, I watched Jessica work her magic on my son, with the skill of a professional. She cooked his favorite meals, laughed at his jokes, and showed just enough independence to stroke his ego while making him feel needed and protective. The breaking point came during Thanksgiving dinner. David had insisted Jessica join us, and she'd arrived with a beautiful pie and stories about how much she missed family holidays since losing her parents. "David," she said softly during dessert, "I need to tell you something. I've been offered a position with a charity in Portland. It's a wonderful opportunity, but it would mean moving away." David's face went white. "You can't leave. Not now." "I don't want to," she said, tears sparkling in her eyes. "But I can't ask you to uproot your life for someone you've known such a short time." "What if we got engaged?" David blurted out. "David, would you stay if we were planning a future together?" I watched this manipulation unfold with sick fascination. Jessica had maneuvered him into proposing by threatening to leave, and David was too besotted to see the strings being pulled. "Oh, David," she whispered. "Are you sure? It seems so fast." "I've never been more sure of anything." David was already reaching for her hand. "I love you, Jessica. Marry me." The proposal was romantic and heartfelt, and Jessica's acceptance was beautifully performed. But I caught her glancing at David's Rolex during their embrace, and I knew I was watching a predator secure her prey. After dinner, I followed Jessica to the guest bathroom. "Can we talk privately for a moment?" She smiled, but something cold flickered in her eyes. "Of course, Margaret. I want you to know that David means everything to me. He's been through a difficult divorce, and he's vulnerable right now." "I understand your concern," Jessica said smoothly. "You're being protective, which shows how much you love him. I promise you, I would never hurt David." "Good, because if you did, if you turned out to be someone other than who you're claiming to be, I would make sure you regretted it." Jessica's smile never wavered, but her voice dropped to a whisper. "Margaret, I think you should be very careful about making threats, especially when David's happiness is at stake. He's told me how protective you can be, how sometimes your concern comes across as controlling and interfering." The threat was subtle but clear. She was already working to isolate David from me, planting seeds that would blossom into conflict later. "Is everything okay in there?" David called from the living room. "Perfect," Jessica called back sweetly. "Your mother and I are just getting to know each other better." 3 months later, they were married in a small ceremony at the courthouse. Ryan was best man, I was matron of honor, and Jessica had no family present because, as she explained tearfully, the holidays were too difficult without her parents. I smiled and took pictures and gave a toast about welcoming Jessica to our family. But that night, I started keeping a journal, documenting every conversation, every interaction, every red flag that David was too love-blind to see. Because I knew this woman was going to destroy my son's life. I just didn't know she was planning to end it. The first sign of serious trouble came 6 months after the wedding, when David called me crying. "Mom, Jessica's pregnant, but she lost the baby. The doctor says it was a miscarriage, probably stress-related." I drove to their house immediately, bringing soup and flowers. Jessica was in bed, pale and tragic, while David hovered nearby looking devastated. "I'm so sorry for your loss," I said, though something felt performative about her grief. "We hadn't even told anyone yet," David said. "We wanted to wait until the 2nd trimester, but—" He broke down again. Jessica reached for his hand. "The doctor said it's common, especially with my age and stress level. But losing this baby, our first child together—" I spent the day cooking and cleaning for them, watching Jessica's performance with growing suspicion. She was suffering, certainly, but there was something calculated about it, as if she was using the tragedy to bind David closer to her. 2 weeks later, Ryan called me with disturbing news. "Mrs. Carter, I don't know how to say this, but I don't think Jessica was ever pregnant." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "David asked me to handle some insurance paperwork related to the miscarriage, and I needed medical records. There's no record of Jessica ever being pregnant. No doctor visits, no blood tests, no ultrasounds. Nothing." "That's impossible," I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew Ryan was right. David wouldn't lie about something like that. David's not lying, but I think Jessica is. Ryan's voice was tight with anger. "I think she faked the entire pregnancy and miscarriage to manipulate him." This was beyond anything I'd imagined, even with all my suspicions. "Do you have proof?" "Not concrete proof, but I started paying attention to details after our conversation. Remember how she said the stress of the holidays caused the miscarriage? I checked the timeline. She claimed to be 8 weeks pregnant in January, which would mean she conceived in early November. But David was traveling for business the entire first 2 weeks of November. I felt sick. So she couldn't have been pregnant by him? Not with that timeline. And there's something else. I hired a private investigator to look into Jessica's background more thoroughly. Ryan, you could have talked to me first. I was protecting David. And you. If something happened to me, I wanted someone else to know what I'd discovered. The investigator had found records of a Jessica Whitmore in Nevada who'd been arrested for fraud 3 years ago. The charges had been dropped when the victim, an elderly man she'd been caring for, died before the case went to trial. She's done this before, I whispered. Multiple times, from what we can tell. She targets wealthy men, usually ones who are isolated or vulnerable. She builds trust, gets access to their finances, then disappears after cleaning them out. But David's not elderly or isolated. He has friends, family. He's a recent divorce with trust issues and more money than he knows what to do with. And she's been working to isolate him. Think about it. When's the last time David called you without her being present? I couldn't remember. What do? We gather evidence and present it to David. But we have to be careful. If we come at this wrong, he'll choose her over us and cut us out completely. Over the next month, Ryan and I worked together, documenting Jessica's lies and inconsistencies. We discovered she'd been using a false social security number, had no credit history before meeting David, and had been married twice before under different names. But when we tried to approach David with our findings, Jessica was already 3 steps ahead of us. David's been very hurt by the suspicions and accusations from people who should support him, she told me during a tense lunch meeting. Especially from you, Margaret. He feels like you've never accepted our marriage. That's not true. I just want him to be happy. Then why are you investigating me? Why are you hiring private detectives and spreading rumors about my past? My blood turned to ice. She knew about Helen and the background check from months ago. David deserves to know if someone he trusts is lying to him. Jessica leaned forward, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Margaret, I'm going to give you some advice. Stop. Whatever you think you've discovered, whatever theories you're building, just stop. Because if you continue down this path, you're going to lose your son forever. Are you threatening me? I'm protecting my marriage. David has already told me about your history of being overprotective and interfering. One more incident, and he's prepared to cut contact with you completely. That evening, David called me. His voice was cold, distant. Mom, we need to talk about boundaries. Jessica told me about your conversation today, and I'm disappointed. You're investigating my wife like she's a criminal. David, she's not who she claims to be. Ryan and I have found evidence. Ryan's jealous that I found happiness after Amanda, and you're having trouble adjusting to me being married. I get that, but this has to stop. What if I could prove that she's lying about her identity, about her past? Then you'd be making the biggest mistake of your life. David's voice was final. Jessica is my wife, and I trust her completely. If you can't respect that, maybe we need some space until you can. After he hung up, I sat in my kitchen staring at the phone, realizing that Jessica had successfully isolated my son from everyone who cared about him. She'd turned his protective instincts against his own family. But I wasn't giving up. If anything, this conversation convinced me that David was in even more danger than I'd realized. I called Ryan, but his phone went straight to voicemail. I tried again an hour later, then drove to his apartment. His car wasn't there, and his neighbor said she hadn't seen him in 2 days. Something was wrong. Ryan had been afraid, I realized, when he'd mentioned wanting someone else to know what he'd discovered. He'd been preparing for the possibility that Jessica might come after him, too. I drove back home through Seattle traffic, mind racing. Jessica had David isolated and suspicious of everyone who might expose her. She'd faked a pregnancy and miscarriage to deepen his emotional attachment. And now Ryan, the only other person who knew the truth about her, was missing. That night, I called the police to report Ryan as missing, but they told me 48 hours hadn't passed yet. Adults were allowed to disappear without checking in with their friends' mothers. I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table with all the evidence Ryan and I had gathered, trying to figure out Jessica's endgame. She'd married David, gained his trust, and systematically removed threats to her position. But what was her ultimate goal? The answer came to me at 3 a.m., sudden and terrifying. David's will. He'd mentioned updating it to make Jessica his primary beneficiary. If something happened to David, she'd inherit everything, $2.8 billion and all his assets. Jessica wasn't planning to steal from David. She was planning to kill him. I spent the sleepless night making lists, connecting dots, building a case that sounded insane even to me. My son's wife was planning to murder him for his inheritance. In the cold light of dawn, I knew no one would believe me without proof, but I had to try to warn David one more time. I arrived at their house at 7 a.m. with fresh croissants and coffee, hoping to catch David before he left for his morning run. Jessica answered the door in a silk robe, hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. "Margaret, what a surprise. I brought breakfast. Is David awake?" "He's in the shower. Actually, this is perfect timing. I've been wanting to talk to you privately." She led me to the kitchen, where she moved with the confidence of someone completely in control of her territory. "Coffee? Please." I set down the bag of pastries, mind racing for the right approach. "Margaret, I know you don't trust me. You've made that very clear. But I need you to understand something. I love David, more than I've ever loved anyone." The words sounded rehearsed, but her delivery was flawless. "Then you'll understand why I'm concerned about some inconsistencies in your background." Jessica poured coffee with steady hands. "What kind of inconsistencies?" "Your parents' accident, your nonprofit work, even your pregnancy." I watched her face carefully. "None of it checks out, Jessica." She was quiet for a long moment, and when she looked up, her eyes were different, colder, more calculating. "You've been very thorough. I'm protecting my son." "From what? From happiness? From love?" Jessica's voice rose slightly. "David and I are building a life together. We're talking about children, travel, growing old together. Why are you so determined to destroy that?" "Because you're lying about everything. Your name, your history, your intentions." Jessica walked to the window, looking out at the garden David had planted for her last spring. "You know, Margaret, you're right about some things. My past is complicated, but everyone deserves a second chance, don't they?" This felt like the closest thing to truth she'd ever told me. "What kind of second chance?" "The chance to be loved by a good man. The chance to build something real and lasting. The chance to leave behind mistakes and poor choices." She turned back to me, and for a moment, her mask slipped entirely. "Do you really think I'd hurt the best thing that's ever happened to me?" Before I could answer, David's voice boomed from upstairs. "Jess? Was that the door?" "Your mother brought breakfast," Jessica called back, her performance mask sliding seamlessly back into place. David appeared in the kitchen, hair still damp from his shower, grinning at the sight of the croissants. "Mom, you're the best. I was just telling Jess we should have you over more often." I watched him kiss his wife's cheek, saw her melt into his embrace with what looked like genuine affection, and felt my certainty waver. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe she really did love him, despite her lies about the past. "David, can I ask you something?" I said carefully. "Have you heard from Ryan lately?" "I've been trying to reach him." David frowned. "Ryan? Yeah. He said he was taking some time off, maybe doing some traveling, said he needed space to think about some things." "Why?" Jessica was watching me over her coffee cup, and I saw something flash in her eyes. Warning? Threat? "Just wondering. He seemed stressed the last time we talked." "Ryan's been having a hard time since his breakup with Sarah," David said. "He'll surface when he's ready. You know how he is about processing emotions." After breakfast, I hugged David goodbye, memorizing the feel of his arms around me, the scent of his cologne, the way he said, "Love you, Mom," like he'd been saying since he was 5 years old, because I was terrified it might be the last time. That afternoon, I did something that went against every ethical principle I'd been taught as a nurse. I drove to the medical examiner's office where my friend Patricia worked and asked her to run a hypothetical toxicology scenario for me. "Margaret, what's this about?" Patricia asked, looking at the list of symptoms I'd provided. "Just humor me. If someone wanted to slowly poison another person, making it look like natural illness, what would they use?" Patricia studied the list. "These symptoms could indicate several things, but given the progression you've described, probably digitalis poisoning." "What's that?" Digitalis is derived from foxglove plants. In small doses, it's used to treat heart conditions. In larger doses, or when accumulated over time, it causes exactly what you've described: fatigue, confusion, digestive issues, eventually leading to heart failure. My mouth went dry. How would someone administer it? Easy. It's tasteless and odorless. Could be added to food, drinks, vitamins. The scary thing about digitalis poisoning is that it mimics natural heart disease, especially in men David's age with high stress levels. I thought about David's recent complaints about feeling tired, his mention of occasional chest pains that his doctor had attributed to stress. How would you detect it? Blood tests, but only if you knew to look for it. Otherwise, it would look like a heart attack, especially if the victim had been under medical care for stress-related symptoms. Patricia leaned forward, concerned. Margaret, please tell me this is for a book you're writing or something. I managed a weak smile. Something like that. That night, I sat in my car outside David and Jessica's house, watching lights move from room to room as they went about their evening routine. At 9 p.m., Jessica's silhouette appeared in the kitchen window. She was at the counter, possibly preparing something to drink, David's nightly tea. He'd mentioned that Jessica had gotten him into the habit of drinking herbal tea before bed to help him relax. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Stop watching or you'll join Ryan. I looked around frantically, but saw no one. My hands were shaking as I started the car and drove home, checking my rearview mirror every few seconds. But I had my answer. Jessica was poisoning David slowly with digitalis, probably through his nightly tea. Ryan had gotten too close to the truth and had been eliminated, and now she was warning me to back off or face the same fate. The next morning, I called Detective Sarah Rodriguez and told her everything. About Jessica's false identity, the faked pregnancy, Ryan's disappearance, and my suspicions about the poisoning. Mrs. Carter, these are very serious accusations. Do you have any concrete evidence? Not enough to convince David, but enough to save his life if you'll listen to me. We agreed to meet that afternoon to go over everything Ryan and I had discovered. But when I arrived at the police station, Detective Rodriguez had terrible news. Mrs. Carter, I'm sorry to tell you this, but we found Ryan Mitchell's body this morning. He'd been dead for several days, apparently from a drug overdose in his apartment. The room started spinning. Ryan doesn't do drugs. He barely drinks alcohol. The medical examiner found heroin in his system, along with paraphernalia in his apartment. It appears to be suicide, possibly related to depression over his recent breakup. That's impossible. Ryan was helping me investigate Jessica. He'd never kill himself, especially not with drugs. Detective Rodriguez studied my face carefully. Mrs. Carter, I'm going to be very direct with you. Grief can make people see conspiracies where none exist. Your son recently married, your relationship with his wife is strained, and now his best friend has died tragically. It's natural to want someone to blame. What if I could prove Jessica killed Ryan? What if I could prove she's poisoning David right now? Then you'd need to bring me evidence, real evidence, not theories and suspicions. I left the police station knowing that if I was going to save David's life, I'd have to do it myself. Jessica had covered her tracks too well, made herself look too innocent, and positioned me as a paranoid, interfering mother whose accusations couldn't be trusted. But I had one advantage she didn't know about. 40 years as a nurse had taught me how to gather evidence, how to document symptoms, and how to prove poisoning even when everyone thinks you're crazy. That night, I made a decision that would either save my son's life or destroy what remained of our relationship forever. I was going to break into David's house and get proof that Jessica was killing him, because in 72 hours, I was certain my son would be dead. Breaking into my son's house felt like the most natural thing in the world when his life was at stake. I'd helped David pick the lock on his childhood bedroom door enough times to know that desperate times call for creative solutions. It was Thursday night, 11 p.m. David and Jessica were at a charity gala downtown, the same type of event where they'd met. I had maybe 3 hours before they returned. Assuming Jessica didn't drug David's champagne there too. I'd spent 2 days planning this like a military operation. Black clothes, small flashlight, latex gloves I'd borrowed from my old hospital supply. If anyone saw me, I was just a concerned mother checking on her son's house while they were away. Perfectly innocent. The back door key was still hidden under the fake rock near David's workshop. Some habits from childhood never die. As I slipped inside, the familiar scent of Jessica's expensive perfume hit me like a wall of deception. The kitchen was pristine, of course. Jessica maintained David's house like a museum. Everything in its place, Nothing out of order. Perfect wife, perfect home, perfect murder in progress. I found David's tea collection in the pantry. Dozens of exotic blends Jessica had introduced him to. Chamomile for relaxation, passion flower for better sleep, and tucked behind the others, a small tin labeled Evening Calm Blend in Jessica's handwriting. The tin contained what looked like ordinary herbal tea, but when I held it under my flashlight and examined it closely, I could see tiny fragments that didn't belong. Small pieces of what looked like dried flowers, darker than the chamomile. Foxglove. I was almost certain of it. I carefully collected a sample in a small plastic bag, then searched the rest of the kitchen. In the spice cabinet, behind the oregano, I found a small glass vial with no label. It contained liquid and smelled faintly medicinal. Liquid digitalis concentrate, most likely. A few drops in David's nightly tea would be virtually undetectable, but would slowly accumulate in his system until his heart simply stopped beating. My phone buzzed. Text message from David. Having a wonderful time at the gala. Jessica looks beautiful tonight. Love you, Mom. Even now, even while she was systematically killing him, he was thinking about how much he loved his murderous wife. My heart broke for him. I photographed everything. The tea tin, the vial, the locations where I'd found them. Then I moved to David's office, looking for evidence of the updated will Jessica had pushed him to create. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. David's computer was password protected, but I knew my son. His password had been the same since college. Roses for Mom, 1987, the year he'd first brought me flowers for Mother's Day with his own money. The will was devastating in its simplicity. Jessica inherited everything. The house, the investments, the bank accounts, even David's shares in his friends' tech companies. There were small bequests to charity, but nothing for me. Not even his father's watch, which had been promised to me years ago. But it was the date that made my blood run cold. The will had been updated just 2 weeks ago, right after Ryan's suicide. Jessica hadn't wasted any time moving to the final phase of her plan. I was photographing the will when I heard a car door slam in the driveway. They were home early. I quickly closed the computer and looked around frantically. The front door was opening, Jessica's laughter echoing through the house. I couldn't get to the back door without passing the living room where they'd see me. "David, you're swaying," Jessica's voice carried clearly. "How much champagne did you have?" "Just 2 glasses, David slurred. "Feel dizzy, though. Maybe I'm coming down with something." Or maybe his loving wife had dosed his champagne with digitalis at the gala, I thought grimly. I had nowhere to hide except David's childhood bedroom upstairs. I made it to the stairs just as they entered the living room, Jessica supporting David as he stumbled slightly. "Let me make you some tea," she said sweetly. "Something to settle your stomach." From the upstairs hallway, I watched Jessica move to the kitchen with practiced efficiency. She filled the kettle, selected a mug, and opened the tea tin I'd just been examining. Even from this distance, I could see her add extra dried herbs to David's cup. She was going to kill him tonight. David was slumped on the couch, head in his hands. "Jess, I feel really sick. Maybe I should call the doctor." "Don't be silly," Jessica said, returning with the steaming mug. "You just need rest. Drink this, and you'll feel better in the morning." I watched my son take the poisoned tea from his wife's hands and trust her completely. He drank half the cup before setting it aside and closing his eyes. "I love you so much," he mumbled. "I love you too," Jessica replied, and for the first time, I thought I heard genuine emotion in her voice, which made what she was doing even more monstrous. Within minutes, David was unconscious on the couch. Jessica checked his pulse, then pulled out her phone and dialed. "It's done," she said quietly. "He had the tea. You can come over now." My heart stopped. There was someone else involved, a partner. 20 minutes later, I heard another car in the driveway. From the bedroom window, I watched a familiar figure approach the front door. Ryan Mitchell, very much alive, walking confidently up to my son's house like he belonged there. Jessica opened the door and kissed him passionately before leading him inside. "How much did you give him?" Ryan asked, kneeling beside David's unconscious form. "Enough to keep him out for hours, but not enough to kill him yet. We need to make this look like a heart attack brought on by stress and alcohol." Ryan pulled a small syringe from his jacket. "The concentrated dose should do it. Quick, painless, and the autopsy will show cardiac arrest consistent with his recent symptoms. I was frozen in horror, watching David's best friend prepare to murder him while his wife held his hand lovingly. "Any word from the old lady?" Ryan asked. "She's backed off since your disappearance. I think she's finally accepted that David chose me over her paranoid accusations." "Good. After tonight, she can grieve her son's tragic early death and leave us alone to enjoy his money." Ryan prepared the syringe while Jessica stroked David's hair. "I really do love him, you know," she said softly. "I know. That's what makes you so good at this." Ryan checked the dosage. "Ready?" That's when I made my decision. I couldn't save David by calling the police. They'd never arrive in time. I couldn't physically overpower both of them, but I could do something else. I could record everything. My phone was already in video mode when Ryan approached David with the syringe. From my position at the top of the stairs, I had a clear view of the living room and could hear every word they said. "Wait," Jessica said suddenly. "Something's wrong. Look at his breathing." Ryan knelt closer to David, checking his pulse. "What do you mean?" "It's too shallow. The digitalis level might have built up more than we calculated." Jessica's voice carried genuine concern. "If we inject him now, it might be obvious it wasn't natural." I watched Ryan sit back on his heels, frustrated. "So what do? We can't wait much longer. Your neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, said she'd check on you tomorrow morning if she didn't hear from David. We adjust the plan. Make it look like he had a heart attack in his sleep. Natural progression from the stress and poisoning." Ryan stood up, pacing. "That's risky. What if he wakes up before morning? What if the digitalis isn't enough? Then we improvise." Jessica's voice hardened. "We've come too far to stop now." I kept recording as they discussed the details of murdering my son like they were planning a dinner party. My hands were shaking, but I forced myself to stay calm and capture every incriminating word. "How much longer until the inheritance is clear?" Ryan asked. 6 months, maybe less. I'll play the grieving widow, sell the house, liquidate the assets. By Christmas, we'll have access to everything." "And then?" Jessica smiled, and it was the first genuine expression I'd seen from her. "Then we disappear. New identities, new lives, somewhere tropical, with no extradition treaties." "You've thought this through." "I've been thinking about it since the day I met David at that charity auction." "Did you really think I was there to help sick children?" Jessica laughed quietly. "I was there because I'd researched every wealthy tech executive in Seattle, and David seemed the most vulnerable." Ryan joined her laughter. "Recent divorce, trust issues, close relationship with his mother that could be exploited to make him feel protective and isolated." "Exactly, and you were perfect bait to get close to him. His best friend since college, someone he trusted completely." I felt nauseous listening to them describe how they'd manipulated David's emotions and relationships. These people had studied my son like a science experiment, identifying his weaknesses and exploiting them systematically. "The fake pregnancy was brilliant," Ryan continued. "Really sealed his commitment to you. That was your idea. And staging my miscarriage right after we'd gathered financial information was perfect timing. They'd planned everything. The courtship, the marriage, even the fake tragedy that had made David more protective and devoted. My son had never had a chance." "What about Margaret?" Ryan asked. "She's been suspicious from the beginning." "Margaret will grieve her son and eventually move on. She's in her 50s, still has time to build a new life. Unlike David, she'll have the luxury of growing old." The casual way Jessica dismissed my future while planning my son's death filled me with rage. But I kept recording, knowing this evidence was the only chance of saving David and ensuring justice. "We should move him to the bedroom," Jessica said. "Make it look more natural when he's found tomorrow." They worked together to lift David's unconscious body, Ryan taking his shoulders while Jessica supported his legs. I watched them carry my son upstairs like pallbearers, discussing the best position to arrange his body for maximum believability. "On his side," Ryan suggested. "Looks like he fell asleep naturally and his heart just stopped." "Perfect. And I'll sleep in the guest room tonight. Say I had insomnia and didn't want to disturb him. Gives me an alibi for not noticing anything wrong until morning." They positioned David carefully in his bed, Jessica even tucking him in with tender care that would have been touching if it weren't part of staging his murder scene. "How much time do we have?" Ryan asked. Jessica checked her phone. "The digitalis should take effect within 3-4 hours. His heart will stop sometime between 4 and 6 a.m. I'll discover the body around 8. Call 911 in hysterics. And the teacup? Already washed and put away? No traces of anything unusual. Ryan kissed Jessica goodbye, and I realized they'd been lovers throughout David's entire marriage. Every family dinner, every holiday celebration, every moment when Ryan had seemed like a loyal friend, he'd been secretly planning my son's destruction. "See you at the funeral," Ryan said with dark humor. "Wear black and practice looking devastated." After Ryan left, Jessica returned to check on David one more time. She sat on the edge of the bed, stroking his hair with what appeared to be genuine affection. "I really am sorry," she whispered. "You're a good man, David. You deserved better than this. But I can't spend my life being poor and powerless when I could be rich and free." Then she kissed his forehead and left him to die. I waited until I heard Jessica close the guest room door before creeping down the hallway to David's room. He was unconscious but breathing, though his pulse felt weak and irregular when I checked his wrist. The digitalis was already affecting his heart rhythm. If I didn't get help soon, the slow poison would kill him even without Ryan's syringe. But I couldn't call an ambulance without alerting Jessica, and I couldn't wake David without risking his heart stopping from the shock. I needed to get him out of the house and to a hospital without anyone knowing. I pulled out my phone and made the hardest call of my life. 911? I need to report an attempted murder in progress. "Ma'am, what's your emergency?" the operator asked. "My name is Margaret Carter. I'm at 1247 Elmwood Drive in Bellevue. My son has been poisoned by his wife, and she's planning to kill him tonight to inherit his money. Are you in immediate danger?" I looked toward the guest room where Jessica was supposedly sleeping. "Yes, but my son is in more danger. He's unconscious from digitalis poisoning. If he doesn't get medical attention within the next few hours, he'll die. Ma'am, I'm dispatching police and paramedics to your location. Can you safely exit the building?" "Not without my son. And there's something else. I have video evidence of the murder plot. The victim's wife and his best friend planned this together." The operator kept me on the line while I explained the situation. Within 12 minutes, I heard sirens approaching. Jessica's door opened immediately. "David, what's happening?" She appeared in the hallway wearing a silk nightgown, hair mussed, looking like the perfect concerned wife awakened by emergency vehicles. Even knowing what she was, I had to admire her commitment to the role. "I don't know," I said, stepping out of David's room. "I came to check on David when I heard sirens and found him unconscious." Jessica's eyes widened in what looked like genuine shock. "Margaret? What are you doing here? I was worried about him. He seemed sick at the gala." Red and blue lights flashed through the bedroom windows as police cars surrounded the house. Jessica rushed to David's bedside, and for a moment I wondered if her performance had convinced even her that she cared about him. David, wake up!" She shook his shoulders gently, then looked at me with fear that seemed completely real. "What's wrong with him?" The front door burst open. "Police? Is anyone injured?" "Up here," I called. "My son is unconscious. I think he's been poisoned." 3 officers and 2 paramedics quickly filled the bedroom. While the medical team worked on David, checking his vital signs and preparing him for transport, Detective Rodriguez questioned Jessica and me. "Mrs. Carter, you called this in as an attempted murder. What evidence do you have?" I handed her my phone, queued up to the video I'd recorded. "Everything you need is on here." Jessica was watching the paramedics work on David, still playing the concerned wife perfectly. But when she heard me mention video evidence, her head snapped toward me with an expression I'd never seen before. Pure, calculated hatred. "Margaret, what are you talking about? You..." "Video of what?" Detective Rodriguez was already watching the recording on my phone. Her expression grew darker with each second of footage. "Jessica Whitmore, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder." The transformation was instant and complete. Jessica's mask of concern vanished, replaced by cold fury. "You can't prove anything. That recording was made illegally, and whatever you think you heard can be explained. Ma'am, we have you on video discussing poisoning your husband with digitalis and planning his death with an accomplice identified as Ryan Mitchell." "Ryan Mitchell is dead," Jessica said smoothly. "He committed suicide last week. If someone is impersonating him, that's not my fault." Detective Rodriguez looked at me, confused. "Mrs. Carter, didn't you tell us earlier that Mr. Mitchell had died?" This was Jessica's backup plan. Even if caught, she'd claim Ryan was an imposter, that the real Ryan was dead and someone else was manipulating her. It was actually brilliant, except for one detail she couldn't have anticipated. "Detective," I said calmly, "I suggest you examine the body that was identified as Ryan Mitchell more carefully. I suspect you'll find it's not him." Jessica's confident expression faltered slightly. "Also," I continued, "you'll find fingerprints all over David's tea supplies and a vial of liquid digitalis hidden in his spice cabinet. And if you check Jessica's phone, you'll probably find text communications with Ryan from before his supposed death." "That's impossible," Jessica snapped. "You're a paranoid old woman making desperate accusations." Detective Rodriguez was already on her radio, requesting backup and additional investigative teams. "Mrs. Whitmore, you have the right to remain silent." As they read Jessica her rights, the paramedics finished stabilizing David for transport. "We need to get him to the hospital immediately," the lead EMT announced. "His heart rhythm is extremely irregular, and his blood pressure is dangerously low." I rode in the ambulance with David, holding his hand while the medical team worked to counteract the digitalis poisoning. At the hospital, doctors confirmed what I already knew. David had been systematically poisoned over several months, and tonight's dose had nearly killed him. "If you hadn't called when you did," the emergency room doctor told me, "he would have been dead within 2 hours." 3 days later, David was awake and recovering when Detective Rodriguez visited with an update that validated everything I'd suspected. The body identified as Ryan Mitchell was actually a homeless man named Thomas Wheeler. Mr. Mitchell had apparently befriended Wheeler, got him addicted to drugs, then overdosed him and switched their identifications. David looked devastated. Ryan's really been alive this whole time? Very much alive, and very much in custody. We arrested him this morning at a motel in Oregon where he was waiting for news about your death. How long had they been planning this? Detective Rodriguez consulted her notes. According to phone records and financial documents we've seized, at least 2 years. The initial approach at the charity auction was completely orchestrated. Mr. Mitchell had been providing Ms. Whitmore with detailed information about your finances, your emotional state, even your relationship patterns. David closed his eyes. "My best friend since college. My wife. They were working together the entire time. I'm sorry, Mr. Carter, but your mother's quick thinking and evidence gathering saved your life." After Detective Rodriguez left, David and I sat together in the hospital room, processing the magnitude of the betrayal he'd experienced. "Mom, I owe you an apology, and my life." I squeezed his hand. "You don't owe me anything, except the promise that you'll never again dismiss my concerns as paranoia." David managed a weak smile. "Deal. But how did you know? How did you see through Jessica when I couldn't?" I thought about the question carefully. "Because I've been a nurse for 40 years, and I've learned to trust my instincts about people. More importantly, I've learned that people who are too good to be true usually are. What happens now? Now you recover, and Jessica and Ryan go to prison for attempted murder, conspiracy, fraud, and probably half a dozen other charges. But even as I said it, I knew the legal process would be long and difficult. Jessica was smart and had covered her tracks well. There was a chance she could plea bargain to a lesser charge or even convince a jury that she was another victim of Ryan's manipulation. That's when I realized that legal justice might not be enough. Sometimes, when the system fails to protect the innocent, you have to create your own justice. The preliminary hearing was a masterclass in legal manipulation. Jessica's attorney, a sharp woman in an expensive suit, painted her client as another victim of Ryan Mitchell's elaborate con game. "Your Honor, my client was as deceived as Mr. Carter. Mr. Mitchell approached Ms. Whitmore 2 years ago, claiming to be concerned about his friend's emotional state after a difficult divorce. He suggested that Ms. Whitmore, who had recently lost her parents and was struggling financially, might be able to provide the companionship and stability Mr. Carter needed." I watched Jessica dab her eyes with a tissue, playing the role of manipulated victim with the same skill she'd used to play David's loving wife. Mr. Mitchell convinced my client that slowly introducing medicinal herbs into Mr. Carter's diet would help with his stress and insomnia. Ms. Whitmore had no knowledge that these were actually poisonous substances or that Mr. Mitchell's ultimate goal was murder. David gripped my hand tightly as we listened to his wife's defense team rewrite history in real time. Furthermore, Your Honor, the prosecution's primary evidence, a video recording made illegally by the defendant's mother-in-law, shows Ms. Whitmore in what appears to be a coercive situation with Mr. Mitchell. She was clearly frightened and following his instructions under duress. The judge looked skeptical, but allowed the defense to continue. My client's marriage to Mr. Carter was genuine. Her grief over their miscarriage was real. Her love for him is documented through 2 years of communications, photographs, and witness testimony from friends and family. What friends and family? I wanted to shout. Jessica had isolated David from everyone who cared about him. But the lawyer's performance was convincing, and I could see doubt creeping into the judge's expression. Given the circumstances, Your Honor, we request that my client be released on bail pending trial. Ms. Whitmore is not a flight risk, has no prior criminal record, and poses no threat to the community. 2 hours later, Jessica walked out of the courthouse on $500,000 bail, paid by an anonymous benefactor who turned out to be Ryan's mother. Even from prison, Ryan was still pulling strings to protect his partner. That night, David called me from his apartment where he was staying while his house remained a crime scene. "Mom, I'm scared. What if Jessica gets acquitted? What if they convince a jury that she was manipulated?" "They won't," I said with more confidence than I felt. "But what if they do? She'll be free to disappear, change her identity again, and find another victim." David was right to be worried. Jessica's defense strategy was sophisticated and might actually work. The video evidence, while damning, had been obtained through illegal entry. The digitalis could be explained as medicinal herbs prescribed by Ryan. Even the fake pregnancy could be spun as another of Ryan's manipulations. "What are you thinking, Mom? I can hear it in your voice." I was thinking about something Detective Rodriguez had mentioned during the investigation. Jessica's pattern of targeting vulnerable, wealthy men wasn't new. She'd done this before. In Nevada and California, always careful to stay just on the legal side of fraud and extortion. I'm thinking that Jessica has hurt other people besides us, and those people deserve justice too. "What do you mean?" "I mean we might not be able to prove she tried to murder you, but we might be able to prove she's committed other crimes. Crimes with different statutes of limitations and different evidence requirements." Over the next 2 weeks, while David recovered and Jessica prepared for trial, I did something I'd never imagined doing. I became an investigator. Working with Helen, the retired private detective who'd helped me initially research Jessica, I tracked down her previous victims, men in 3 different states who'd been charmed, manipulated, and robbed by Jessica under different identities. The pattern was always the same. Identify a wealthy, recently divorced man, approach him through mutual interests or charitable causes, establish a romantic relationship, gain access to finances, then disappear before anyone could prove criminal intent. "She's been doing this for at least 8 years, Helen told me over coffee. "We've found 5 confirmed victims, and probably more who were too embarrassed to report it. Why didn't any of them press charges? Same reason David almost didn't survive. She's very good at making herself look like the victim. Claims the men were abusive or controlling, or that she was trying to leave, but they wouldn't let her. By the time they realize they've been robbed, she's gone, and their money is in offshore accounts they can't trace." But David's case was different. This time, Jessica had gotten greedy. Instead of just stealing and disappearing, she'd tried to commit murder for a much larger payoff, and this time, she'd been caught on video planning the crime. "What if we could get her other victims to testify?" I asked. "That would require them to come forward, and most of them won't want the publicity. But there might be another way." Helen had been thinking about Jessica's financial trail. All that money she stole had to go somewhere. If we can trace her bank accounts and investments, we might find evidence of money laundering or tax evasion, federal crimes with serious penalties. How do we do that? We don't, but the FBI might, if they had a reason to investigate. That's when Helen told me about Special Agent Maria Santos, who specialized in financial fraud cases involving romance scams and inheritance theft. Agent Santos has been tracking a network of con artists who target wealthy older men and women. Jessica's pattern fits perfectly with several unsolved cases they're investigating. I met with Agent Santos the following Monday in a small coffee shop downtown. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 40, with sharp eyes and the kind of focused intensity that made me understand why criminals feared federal investigators. Mrs. Carter, I've read the case file, and I'm very interested in Ms. Whitmore's financial activities, but I need to ask you something directly. Are you willing to help us build a federal case against her? What would that involve? It would involve you working undercover to gather evidence of Jessica's other crimes. Specifically, we need proof that she's been using multiple identities to commit financial fraud across state lines. My heart started racing. You want me to spy on her? We want you to make contact with her and convince her to trust you with information about her past activities. Given your age and apparent innocence, she might view you as someone she could manipulate or confide in. I thought about David, recovering at home with trust issues that might never heal. I thought about Jessica's other victims, men who'd been humiliated and robbed by someone they'd loved. I thought about future victims who might not survive what Jessica had planned for them. What do you need me to do? Agent Santos smiled for the first time since we'd met. We need you to visit Jessica and convince her that you want to make a deal. The visiting room at King County Jail smelled like disinfectant and despair. I sat across from Jessica, separated by scratched plexiglass, trying to project the image of a defeated old woman rather than the federal informant I'd become. Margaret, Jessica said through the phone, I'm surprised you came. I needed to see you, to understand. Jessica's eyes showed calculated interest rather than surprise. Even in prison orange, with no makeup and her hair pulled back severely, she was still beautiful, still dangerous. Understand what? How you fooled all of us so completely. How you made David love you while planning to kill him. I let my voice break slightly. I need to know if any of it was real. Jessica was quiet for a long moment, studying my face. You're recording this conversation, aren't you? How could I? They check everything. Not electronically, but emotionally. You're fishing for information to use against me at trial. I leaned forward, lowering my voice. Jessica, my son nearly died. My relationship with David is damaged, possibly permanently. I'm 58 years old, and I just want this nightmare to end. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that there might be a way for both of us to get what we want. Jessica's expression sharpened. I'm listening. David has decided not to testify against you. He's too traumatized by the betrayal to face cross-examination about your marriage. This was true. David had told prosecutors he couldn't handle reliving the details of how Jessica had manipulated his emotions and nearly killed him. Without David's testimony, I continued, the prosecution's case relies heavily on my illegally obtained video. Your lawyer says there's a good chance it'll be thrown out. She's optimistic about our chances. Jessica agreed carefully. But if you're acquitted, you'll be broke. Legal fees, lost assets, no access to David's money. I paused, letting her process this. Unless someone helped you start over. Someone like you? David feels guilty about how this has affected me. He's offered to set up a trust fund for my retirement. Something substantial enough that I could help certain people disappear if necessary. Jessica's eyes lit up with interest, but her voice remained cautious. Hypothetically, how much money are we discussing? $500,000. Cash. Enough for someone to create a new identity and relocate somewhere without extradition treaties. Hypothetically, Jessica said slowly. Someone in that situation would need more than money. They'd need documentation, contacts, a support network for establishing a new life. Hypothetically, someone who'd done this before would already have those contacts. This was the moment Agent Santos had coached me toward. Jessica had just admitted to having connections for creating false identities and fleeing the country. Margaret, I think you're more cunning than anyone gave you credit for. I learned from watching you. Jessica laughed, and for the first time since I'd met her, it sounded genuine. You know, under different circumstances, we could have been friends. Under different circumstances, you wouldn't have tried to murder my son. True. But Margaret, if we're going to help each other, I need to know you're serious. That you understand what you're getting into. I understand that you've done this before, multiple times, and that David wasn't your first victim. Jessica nodded slowly. David was supposed to be my last victim, the score that would set me up for life. What went wrong? You went wrong. You were supposed to be a typical interfering mother-in-law who could be managed or discredited. Instead, you turned out to be relentless and smart. Jessica leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. But you're right about one thing. I do have contacts, resources, ways of creating new identities. The network Ryan and I used spans 3 countries and has been operating for over a decade. Agent Santos was going to love this confession. "If I help you access David's money," I said, "and you use your contacts to disappear, what guarantee do I have that you won't come back for revenge? You don't. But consider this. Why would I risk a comfortable life in a non-extradition country to pursue a vendetta against someone who helped me escape? Because you're a sociopath who killed my son's best friend and tried to murder my child?" Jessica's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and alien underneath. "Margaret, I think you misunderstand my situation. Ryan killed Thomas Wheeler, not me. Ryan obtained and administered the digitalis, not me. Ryan planned the murder timeline, not me. You were on the video discussing all of it. I was on video being coerced by a violent criminal who threatened to kill me if I didn't cooperate." Jessica's voice took on the same innocent tone she'd used in court. A jury might very well believe that I was another victim. This was Jessica's backup plan. Even if convicted, she'd appeal based on duress and coercion. She was already preparing to blame everything on Ryan while positioning herself as manipulated victim. "But Jessica," I said quietly, "there's something you don't know." "What's that?" "Ryan didn't kill Thomas Wheeler." Jessica's confident expression faltered. "What are you talking about? The body was identified. Thomas Wheeler is alive. He's in federal custody, and he's told investigators everything about how you and Ryan recruited him to fake Ryan's death." The color drained from Jessica's face. "That's impossible. Nothing's impossible when you have federal agents building a case. Thomas told them about the drugs you supplied, the false identification you created, the money you paid him to disappear for 6 months while you executed your plan." Jessica was staring at me with growing horror as she realized her carefully constructed defense was collapsing. "There's more," I continued. "The FBI has identified 4 other victims in 3 states. Men you robbed using different identities over the past 8 years. They're all willing to testify about your methods and your pattern of financial manipulation. You're lying. Special Agent Maria Santos sends her regards. She's very excited about adding you to her collection of interstate fraud convictions." Jessica slumped in her chair, finally understanding that she'd been outmaneuvered. "What do you want?" "I want you to confess to everything. David's poisoning, the murder conspiracy, the financial fraud, all of it. Complete confession in exchange for life in prison instead of the death penalty. And if I refuse?" I stood up, preparing to leave. "Then you face federal charges for racketeering, conspiracy, multiple counts of fraud, and attempted murder with special circumstances, in states that have the death penalty." As I walked toward the exit, Jessica called after me. "Margaret, this isn't over." I turned back one last time. "Yes, Jessica, it is." 6 months later, Jessica pled guilty to 19 federal charges and received 4 consecutive life sentences without possibility of parole. Ryan received the same sentence after his own confession implicated them both in a decade-long criminal enterprise. David sold his house and moved to Portland, where he started a nonprofit foundation helping victims of financial fraud. He calls me every Sunday, and sometimes he even laughs at my jokes again. As for me, I kept the promise I'd made to Agent Santos. I consulted on 3 more cases involving romance scams targeting older adults, helping federal investigators build cases against predators who thought they could exploit people like me. Turns out, underestimating a mother's protective instincts is the most dangerous mistake a criminal can make. I'm Margaret Carter, and I don't forgive people who threaten my family, but I do make sure they spend the rest of their lives regretting it. Some lessons are only learned behind bars. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.